Faced with chronic unemployment and a skill shortage, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa proposes a new deal. Amid intrigue and uproar, U.S. President Donald Trump fumes over Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe. And the South by Southwest Festival and Conference in Austin, Texas, creates networking opportunities for African entrepreneurs. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Now, South Africa is the continent's most industrialized nation and Africa's largest hub of foreign investment, direct foreign investment. But the country is buckling under chronic unemployment and a dire skills shortage. The new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has very little time to turn that around. Africa 54's Haiti Adams-Fitzpatrick joins us now to tell us more.
Thank you, Vincent. Cyril Ramaphosa says 2018 will be the year of job creation, and he's proposing a new deal to take South Africa forward and restore faith in the government both at home and abroad. Cyril Ramaphosa faces the biggest test of his business and political mettle. He has to be part economist, part diplomat, part unifier, and above all, optimist in chief. With elections set for 2018, South Africans will expect some payoff for betting on one of the country's wealthiest politicians. At the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, analyst John Campbell says patience and perception will be key to his success.
Investor confidence is very much a matter of how a government is perceived. And how a government is perceived has a great deal to do with who the chief of state is. That confidence is likely to translate into jobs, but it's a slow process. So the question, I suppose, will be, how patient will the people of South Africa be?
Managing the mood in the country won't be easy. South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world. With a 27% unemployment rate, inequality is worse now than it was at the end of apartheid. South Africans visiting Washington are optimistic but cautious about what Ramaphosa can accomplish.
Making sure that unemployment is reduced, highly reduced, and corruption, lack of corruption.
Get more jobs. He will do that, but will you be able to house everyone that's poor? Will you be able to supply everyone with free schooling, with university? No, I don't think he ever will.
Ramaphosa is making youth job creation a national priority. Of the 10 million South Africans between the ages of 15 and 24, more than half are unemployed. Most have never had a job, and the vast majority are not pursuing any education or training. The ruling African National Congress Party has promised free tertiary education for the poor and working class, starting this year.
The result of too many people being unemployable, not having the skills that a modern economy needs. Then the notion of, if not free tertiary education, a reorganization and a much greater emphasis on education would seem to be a way of getting at the poverty issue.
Critics worry that South Africa's 26 universities will be flooded with applications as many rush to get in. Campbell cautions against a narrow focus on tertiary education alone.
Universities are only a relatively small part of the student population. If you're going to break the poverty cycle, particularly through education, it has to be at the primary and secondary levels.
Some observers in South Africa say a youth-first policy would require an inclusive approach.
If he's to succeed on these issues, I think he needs to bring in big business, he needs to bring in labor, he needs to also make sure that civil society is part of this. And I have absolutely no doubt that he will take South Africa to greater heights.
Now, whether Ramaphosa's promises are realistic goals or simply campaign rhetoric, the coming months will determine whether he can succeed where his predecessors have failed. Vincent?
Thank you. Indeed, a big task ahead of him. While going to West Africa now, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has decided not to attend the Africa Union Summit in Rwanda this week, according to an official statement released on Sunday. Buhari was scheduled to leave Abuja for Kigali on Monday ahead of Wednesday's launch, but pulled out to allow for more consultations. Key stakeholders in Nigeria indicated that they had not been consulted and they had some concerns on the provisions of the treaty. The meeting in Kigali is intended to formally launch the African Continental Free Trade Area Treaty, which Nigeria's cabinet endorsed last Wednesday. Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza could stay in power until 2034. On Sunday, Nkurunziza set May the 17th as the date for a referendum that could extend his rule for at least a decade. The small and impoverished Central African nation has been unstable since 2015, when Nkurunziza decided to seek a third term in office, a term that his opponents say is unconstitutional. The referendum will decide whether to amend the constitution to extend presidential terms to 7 years from 5. The proposed changes would limit the president to 2 consecutive terms. However, it will not take into account previous terms, potentially extending Nkurunziza's rule to 2034. Several leaders across Africa have sought to avoid laws or use other tactics to thwart opponents and prolong their reigns beyond constitutional limits, sometimes for decades. Now, in 2016, more than 7,500 potential cases of human trafficking, including sex trafficking, were reported to the Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline. Most unsuspecting victims in the Washington, D.C. area are young teens from middle to upper income families who were chosen and groomed by men who initially romanced them before turning violent. In part 1 of our series, viewers Caroline Prisuti shares the story of one young woman and her mother. We have changed their names and are not showing their faces at their request.
A siren ended Kate's long nightmare.
I was seconds away of never being found again.
Kate says the police lights gave her a glimmer of hope after months of sex slavery. It started when Kate was in the 9th grade. Her abductor, Luis, who has never been charged in this case, was enrolled at her high school in a program for undocumented immigrants. He was 21 years old. She was 14.
The first thing he ever said when he messaged me on Facebook before it was hi or anything was, "You have beautiful eyes."
Kate fell in love. At night, Luis would knock on her bedroom window and sneak her out to parties. But one night, she didn't come home.
I was with all these old men, but all I saw was they thought I was pretty. They gave me attention. I remember blacking out. Some things are still really blurry to this day. Had lots of bruises and lots of internal damage.
Later, she learned Luis was a member of MS-13, a vicious Central American gang. Barely a teenager, Kate was being drugged with heroin and PCP and sold for sex to make money for the gang.
I didn't think anyone would find me, who would look for me.
Amy is Kate's mom.
She's the love of my life. She's my baby girl. And when she went missing, I knew deep down inside that she needed me to find her.
But police saw Kate as a runaway. Luis saw her as an object.
He, I guess you could say, branded me almost with a symbol, like a money sign symbol on my hip. And that's when I realized I was just done for. Like, he literally just claimed me.
And she says the abuse felt endless.
Someone would come in, someone would rape me, someone would leave. Within the hour, someone else would come in, or 2 or 3 more. I was non-stop doing this for days at a time. I wasn't fed, didn't have water, and my pimp just sat there and watched.
Weeks later, as the gang was about to take her out of state, Kate saw the police lights and knew it was over. After 5 years of intensive treatment, Kate now has hope of a different kind. She's engaged and pregnant with a girl. Carolyn Prisuti, VOA News, Northern Virginia.
Well, in part two of our three-part series, Caroline Presutti takes us along as the FBI state and county police launch a sting operation to rescue teenage girls from sex trafficking rings. Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. You're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Now, coming up, U.S. President Donald Trump takes aim at the Russia probe. Stay with us.
This is a country that I chose to become a citizen. I didn't have to become a citizen. I chose to become a citizen.
I feel like America gave me an opportunity to pursue my passion as an artist.
I really believe that clean eating is a way to a more successful life or a happier life, if you want to put it that way.
One of the things that helps me wake up every morning is doing better, being better.
We grew up poor, and so I'm always focused on helping the working class be able to have a more comfortable lifestyle.
I'm passionate about doing justice every day. I oftentimes say that justice is a verb, not a noun. You know, I believe in action and moving the ball forward.
Welcome back. Now, intrigue and uproar has spiked yet again in Washington regarding the Russia probe, with renewed questions arising about the future of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. As VOA's Michael Bowman reports, days after FBI Deputy Director James Comey was fired, U.S. lawmakers warned Donald Trump against any intention he may have had to investigate Mueller's dismissal.
President Trump took to Twitter Sunday to accuse the special counsel probe of political bias. Why does the Mueller team have 13 hardened Democrats, some big crooked Hillary supporters, and 0 Republicans? Another Dem recently added, "Does anyone think this is fair?" And yet there is no collusion. A day earlier, the president tweeted, "The Mueller probe should never have been started." Meanwhile, Trump's personal attorney urged the special counsel investigation be terminated.
This would undoubtedly result in a constitutional crisis, and I think Democrats and Republicans need to speak out about this right now.
Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has the authority to fire Mueller and could conceivably do so at the president's behest. Democrats are not alone in warning of severe consequences if the president engineered the dismissal of the man investigating Trump's inner circle and possibly Trump himself. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham called such a move the beginning of the end of his presidency.
It's best for the special counsel to be able to go through their process. It's best for the president, best for the presidency, for this to be resolved and to be finished one way or the other.
Multiple media outlets report Mueller's team is seeking documents about Trump's past business dealings in Russia and elsewhere. Trump has repeatedly lashed out at an array of Justice Department officials, past and present, after Attorney General Jeff Sessions fired FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe Friday. The president tweeted, "There was tremendous leaking, lying, and corruption at the highest levels of the FBI, justice, and state." McCabe has denied allegations he improperly disclosed information about ongoing investigations to the news media. He says he kept detailed memos of his interactions with the president, similar to those of former FBI Director James Comey, who was fired by Trump last year. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
Following Rex Tillerson's abrupt firing as U.S. Secretary of State last Tuesday, attention was quickly turned to President Donald Trump's nominee to take his place, CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Whether it be Iran, North Korea, or Russia, analysts say Pompeo's views are more in sync with Trump's than Tillerson's were. And like the president, Pompeo favors U.S. military strength over the soft power of diplomacy. VOA diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
Change is coming to U.S. foreign policy, but the talks with North Korea are still on track. Rex Tillerson took credit for that in an emotional farewell speech after he was fired by the president.
First, working with allies, we exceeded the expectations of almost everyone with the DPRK maximum pressure campaign.
His expected successor, CIA Director Mike Pompeo, is known for taking a harder line view on a range of foreign policy issues.
I talked last week about the fact that North Korea is ever closer to being able to hold America at risk.
Based on his past statements on North Korea, China, and Iran, most analysts say Pompeo, a West Point graduate, will likely rely more on U.S. military strength and be less supportive of international agreements than Tillerson.
I think Pompeo is more of a hawk, more of a Trumpian. He is more of this sort of new wave of, I would call it, American nationalism. And we see countries becoming more nationalistic all over the world.
If confirmed by the Senate, Pompeo may quickly face two big tests: a planned summit between Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un, and a deadline to renew the U.S. commitment to the Iran nuclear deal. Democratic lawmakers and retired diplomats think his selection makes it more likely the U.S. will pull out of the Iran agreement. That, they say, could endanger the Kim-Trump summit.
There is no way in the world that throwing out a valid agreement that is working would increase your negotiating leverage with North Korea. Rather, it should cause the North Korean leader to ask himself, how can I sign any agreement with a president who's prepared to break every previous agreement?
On Russia, Pompeo has gone further than the president in calling out Russia for attacking the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
It's pretty clear about what took place here, about Russian involvement in efforts to hack information and to have an impact on American democracy.
Analysts agree that Pompeo has Trump's admiration and respect. That will facilitate his job if he becomes the next chief U.S. diplomat. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. How African entrepreneurs are mixing, mingling, and networking a world-famous festival. We'll be back in a moment. But first, here's a recap of Monday's headlines.
In Madagascar, at least 17 people were killed and more than 6,000 were displaced by a tropical storm which hit the island over the weekend. In Kenya, due to heavy rains and flooding, at least 15 people were killed. The ambulance service also reported collapsed buildings and road collisions caused by flood waters after 3 days of torrential rain. In Morocco, defying a government ban, thousands protest in Jarada, a former mining town, demanding an alternative economy and the release of jailed activists while marching to the police station. Finally, in South Africa, the 15th Cape Epic began in Cape Town Sunday, with hundreds of bicyclists taking part in the 658-kilometer course across mountainous terrain. They are expected to reach the finish line next Sunday.
Could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The
beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Energy generating, sleep monitoring, and health tracking. The latest wearable tech may become part of our everyday life. Once a top tech trend, wearable technology is now finding useful applications in the health and manufacturing industries. According to tech research firm Gartner, 310 million wearable devices were sold worldwide last year, a 16.7% increase from 2016. Most of those were smartwatches, but also head-mounted displays, body-worn cameras, and Bluetooth headsets. Meanwhile, a bike-sharing craze that has swept China is picking up speed in cities across the United States. But with key differences, Chinese startups pioneered dockless bike sharing. Unlock a bike with your cell phone, ride it, park it, and relock it. But the downside has been bikes piled everywhere in many cities. Many major U.S. cities sharply limit how many dockless bike companies can operate and how many bikes they can offer. Bike-sharing companies also face the challenge of getting Americans accustomed to driving to pedal instead, especially when the public transport options are far inferior to those in the biggest Chinese cities. And finally, Snapchat is not doing well with celebrities. The app continues to see a fallout after Rihanna responded to an offensive ad, resulting in the loss of almost $1 billion. This came after Rihanna criticized the app for displaying an ad for a mobile video game called Would You Rather? That asked whether a user would rather slap Rihanna or punch Chris Brown. Rihanna took to Instagram to write, all the women, children, and men that have been victims in the past, and especially the ones who haven't made it out yet, you let us down. And that's what's trending today. Now, Maryam Durrani is a child prodigy who wrote a book, her first book at age 13, making her one of the youngest authors in America. But as viewers Niala Muhammad reports, the hijab-wearing teen defies stereotypes associated with Muslims and girls.
Maryam Durrani is a typical American teenager with a wild imagination and a knack for telling stories about dungeons, dragons, kingdoms, and young girls. Durrani wrote her first book in longhand at the age of 13. Later, she learned about a website called Wattpad.com, where she could upload her stories and get feedback from readers.
On one of my works, I received over 500,000 reads, and people are still reading them because I can see their votes and their reads and comments on my work. Somebody actually messaged me one day, and they were like, is it okay if we rewrite your whole book and send it to somebody as a gift? And I was like, wait, that's a really good idea. Why don't I do that? Why don't I sell my own books?
Durrani, now 18, credits much of her writing success to her parents. Her father, Irfan Durrani, helped get her books published, while her mother, Zainab Durrani, fostered her passion for literature.
Maryam was always into books, and I remember when she was 3 years old, I noticed that whenever she would be upset, the only thing that would raise her spirits was to read her a story. And I could tell from her expressions that she would be lost in her own imaginary world. And when she was in kindergarten, I gave her a journal with pen, and I asked her to write in it and to express her feelings. And I think her writing journey began from there.
But the teen soon tired of books with traditional storylines, which often revolve around a male hero who saves the day. So she decided to change things a bit, creating characters that would appeal to young girls.
I wanted to write about someone I could look up to. And that's where I came up with the idea for this main character. She's a warrior, a general. She can do anything she wants. She's powerful. And that was just me looking up to somebody, wanting to write about a role model for me and other girls.
The Durranis are proud of Maryam's accomplishments as a writer, but they are especially proud that their daughter has become herself a role model for young girls, including those who wear hijab, like her. With cameraman Imran Jadun, I'm Naila Mohammed, VOA News.
South by Southwest is not just an annual music festival and tech conference in Austin, Texas. It also includes venues where people from specific countries or regions of the world can gather to share ideas. This is the inaugural year for Africa House at South by Southwest, and it's providing valuable networking opportunities for Africans who come to experience and benefit from this eclectic festival. Here's VOA's Elizabeth Lee.
From African musicians to African entrepreneurs.
It's a premium handcrafted leather casual sneaker.
You'll find many gathered here at Africa House.
We've traveled all the way from Africa to meet Africa here and to meet people that we otherwise would never have had a chance to meet back home.
Brenda Katusije traveled from Uganda to talk about her startup Wazi Vision at Africa House. She says her frames made from recycled plastic are 80% cheaper than what's on the market.
We need people that are here that can sell them in their stores. We need people with online e-commerce platforms that can help with logistics and everything. I've made some really meaningful contacts that I plan on following up on.
And that is the purpose of Africa House, creating a platform to bring Africans to South by Southwest who would otherwise not be here. C.D. Glenn is with the U.S. African Development Foundation, one of the sponsors of Africa House.
They're coming here to some extent to network with the diaspora. These are Africans who are now living here in Austin and doing things at the local level, but also who are looking for a real connection back to Africa.
It's a network is to make more vibes.
Musicians and entrepreneurs at Africa House
helping people, benevolent,
are also meeting members of the African diaspora from other U.S. cities, American investors, and other fellow Africans such as Bumi Akiamichu from Nigeria.
We look for new technologies, we look for new startups. So while we look for startups, that allows us to actually make investments in those startups that can collaborate with a parent company.
This was a place where they can make connections that they would otherwise not be able to make. So it was a long trip, but well worth it.
Glenn says this may be the first Africa House at South by Southwest, but it won't be the last. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News, Austin.
Well, and that's our show for today, and be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings, Today Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching, and from all of us here, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Lots of items are made from gold, like jewelry, coins, and medals.
Golden opportunity.
This sounds like a strange thing to be made of gold.
Jonathan, are you as excited as I am about the holiday next week?
I might be more excited. The holiday is a golden opportunity for me to catch up